Hi, Tom McGrath here again from my Fortress of Solitude with another story about my friend Don. This time I've decided to go a bit retro and do this intro in black and white. After all, this is a story about the distant past. I affectionately call this one Don and the Cuckoo Clock. It started out as a chapter in a story that I wrote for Playboy magazine back in 1997 entitled Ken's Story. Thank you very much. After Don's divorce from Sandy, he moved in with his mother in a house in Simi Valley. Don worked at the Anheuser-Busch Brewery in Van Nuys in the stockhouse. He liked to stay in the valley after work, have an early dinner, then go out to a local bar and have a few cocktails. It was at one of these establishments called Bogies that I made Don's acquaintance. We had a mutual friend named Ken, who had an apartment a couple of doors down from mine on Parthenia Avenue in what was then known as Sepulveda. Now it's called North Hills. This apartment was situated conveniently right in the middle of Don's stomping ground. Ken lived alone and had a nice big couch, while I lived in a two-bedroom apartment which I shared with a roommate. So when Don figured he'd had a few too many drinks and didn't want to drive all the way back to Simi Valley and wake up Grandma, he'd spend the night on Ken's couch. It just so happened that during this period, Ken's hobby was collecting clocks. Every bit of space on every single wall in Ken's apartment, except for the bathroom mirror, held some kind of clock. He had clocks of every imaginable variety. He had little round alarm clocks, 6-foot-tall grandfather clocks. He had clocks that looked like musical instruments, stagecoaches, fire engines, seascapes, and driftwood. He even had a clock that looked like clocks. One Friday night, Don had a few drinks with us and asked Ken if he might sleep it off on Ken's couch. Even though Ken had plans of his own for the evening, he was always willing to help a friend. This is a picture of Ken and his girlfriend at Knott's Berry Farm, playing dress up for the camera. Ken's the one holding the Winchester 74. Don was to sleep on a large leather couch resting along the main wall in Ken's living room beneath a guitar clock and a couple of pendulum clocks. In fact, it is this couch from which this picture was taken. In the daytime, this couch was covered with throw pillows. While Ken and Valerie adjourned to the bedroom, Don probably helped himself to a large glass of vodka from Ken's well-stocked bar and made himself comfortable by pushing some of the pillows onto the floor. Shortly afterwards, Don was passed out and oblivious to his surroundings. After a few hours, he awoke, contorted and disoriented. Though he still was seeing things through an alcoholic haze, he felt sober enough to take his leave and drive home. But since he didn't want to disturb his host, he stopped and listened for sounds of activity from the bedroom. He was just about to get up and go when he heard the word, "Er-ee, er-ee, er-ee," the unmistakable rhythmic sound of bouncing bed springs. Now was not the time to go. Now was not the time to interrupt Ken and spoil the moment. For you see, Don too was well acquainted with Ken's prowess with women. The dictates of courtesy and friendship called for forbearance, so Don decided to lay back and wait it out. There was no hurry, so again Don dozed off. Again and again he awoke, only to be greeted by the relentless refrain, "Er-ee, er-ee." Don looked at the ghostly white dial of his wristwatch, 3 a.m., and Ken was still at it. How does he do it? Thought Don. He can't possibly keep it up all night. Or could he? Unfortunately for Don, he could, and he did. I found Don the next morning laying on the couch in a dazed stupor, his eyes red as a ripe plum. He barely slept a wink. He was eager to talk. He confessed that Ken and Valerie had kept him up all night. Ken had kept it up all night. Don was exhausted, but he was impressed. Every time I try to leave, Don whispered, there it was, er-ee. He does it like clockwork, I tell you. It's unbelievable. But Don was a believer. You could see it in his eyes, bloodshot as they were. Poor thing, he murmured under his breath, as if just comprehending the enormity of the toll that the night's activities must have taken on poor Valerie. Just then, one of Ken's cuckoo clocks, the one over the bedroom door, tried its best to chime on the hour, but gave out a half-hearted, constipated squeak instead. Er-ee. You mean he does it just like that? I queried. I'd heard the sound many times before. When Ken came out in his bathrobe to get a cup of coffee, he must have thought it strange that both Don and I were rolling on his floor laughing and pointing at his clock. Ken must have wondered which one of us was the bigger cuckoo.